Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first ever province-wide Seedy Saturday event. Bienvenue à la toute première fête des semences à l'échelle provinciale. My name is Jason Wong, and I am the Digital Mapping Coordinator at Food for All NB. Food for All NB is a bilingual province-wide network with a vision of a New Brunswick that is informed, connected, and engaged in food security for all. We support food movements in New Brunswick by sharing information and resources, making cross-sectoral connections with food actors, and holding space for conversations on food issues. So today is a re-recorded session from our Seedy Saturday event in February 2021. Today's session is Gardens for Communities, where we will cover ways you can get involved in gardening and how the Raven Project is helping build communities led by Amy Floyd. So a little bit about Amy Floyd herself. She lives with her partner Drew in Taymouth, where they live off-grid and have large gardens. Taymouth is in the Nashua Valley watershed, which is Wolastoqey traditional territory. So Amy works with the Raven Project as a senior food security policy analyst. Raven, or Rural Action and Voices for the Environment, is an activist media and research project that works with and supports champions for sustainable rural communities and the environment in New Brunswick. The project uses participatory methods to study how alternative digital media can transform perceptions of rural communities and support environmental justice. So without any further ado, Amy, thank you for joining us, and please take it away.
I'm going to talk a little bit about using community gardening, not necessarily specifically community gardens, but different kinds of community projects as a way of not just creating food security, but also building community. And Madison kindly read my bio for me when we did the original presentation. I'm not going to read it, but I will leave that for you. And if you want to pause the video and have a read through, go ahead. So the Raven Project is a social sciences research project based in UNB through the Department of Sociology. And we're running for a 4-year term. So 2022 will be our wrap-up date. There's some possibility that it may be extended. The objective of the project is to work with engaging rural voices. So one of the things that researchers found was that a lot of the information to come out of rural areas tended to be extraction and natural resource based, and rural voices were sometimes missing or sometimes misrepresented. And so the idea was to try to engage with communities on projects that were community led and do this participatory research. And so one of the ways that we do that is by partnering with the NB Media Co-op. The NB Media Co-op would be one of only 2 newspapers in the province that are not owned by Brunswick News. So it's kind of nice to have a little more, I don't know how you would say it, left-leaning information, I guess, in an Anglophone newspaper. And all of the writers for the NB Media Co-op are volunteers. And so we have other opportunities to do projects with folks, like we could help with video or photo voice. We can help people learn how to write for the media co-op so that they can tell stories about their own community. And I'm working with the Growing a Better Future project. So I'm the only person working on rural food security, and it's a bit of a kind of a pilot, I guess, to see how things go. You can learn more about us on our website and also the NB Media Co-op. And there's loads and loads of research-related resources. A lot of times people know the brief, which is one big broadsheet that we put out in restaurants and coffee shops and garages and things. But the Media Co-op website contains hundreds of stories all the way back from the beginning, which is more than 10 years ago now. So what I wanted to achieve, and I was really grateful because my supervisor gave me a lot of leeway in this project. So I was able to pick projects that really made a lot of sense for me, and I live in this valley where I'm working. So I wanted projects that could be easily replicated in any New Brunswick community. I wanted to work with existing community resources, using free resources as much as possible. And you'll see as we go through that all the projects are under $5,000. So even if funding is lost, hopefully we can very easily fundraise or pull together what we need to keep going. I wanted to include people that don't have reliable internet access, which are many here actually. Some of us don't even have cell phone access at home. And then also I wanted to really consider low literacy. I believe we have about a 47% functional literacy rate in New Brunswick, and that would be like a grade 8 level. So I wanted to keep all my communications really straightforward. And I wanted to build a community of mutual aid. And there's mutual aid is just really about cooperation and trying to do things more in a way that looks like barter. And I do this with just 12 hours a week, but it's really fun, and I have lots of support from volunteers and community people. In the beginning, I didn't really know exactly how to get people involved, so we actually just made this Canva poster and took it out and started to put them up on bulletin boards at the post office and the gas station and all over. And we actually had 12 people drive in a snowstorm to get to the first meeting, and it was really fun and really inspiring. A lot of the folks lived in the same community but didn't necessarily know each other. So that was January of 2020, and we've been meeting off and on ever since. We decided that since the Raven Project is going to end in 2022, it would be really great to create another entity that could extend past that date. And we wanted to kind of put our own local stamp on it. So we called ourselves the Nashua Community Growers. We have a website you can visit if you want to learn a little bit more. We do a monthly meetup whenever possible. Of course, it's been 2020 was a tough year for that. We're really about food production and also rural self-sufficiency. So we teach, anything that people want to learn about. We can learn about maple syrup tapping or how to build the best greenhouse for our climate so the snow doesn't collapse, and all kinds of things like that. And we use the Nashua Community Growers name specifically because we wanted to also talk and think more about rural community development. So I'm going to talk about 3 projects, and I'm going to go through this relatively quickly with the idea that you'll be able to look at resources at the end, and you'll also be able to reach out to me anytime if you have questions and want to talk more. So the Valley Grow project started in 2020. This is Travis and his garden, which did phenomenally well. This fellow hadn't gardened since he was about, I think, 8 years old. The Valley Grow project was a response to the pandemic, and I had a lot of anxiety about perhaps trucks not being able to make it across the border, and I was really acutely worried about our local food supply in the beginning. And so I went to my supervisor, Susan O'Donnell, who's really great and flexible, and I said, I really want to help people start backyard gardens. So she was able to very quickly set some money aside, and she allotted $200 per household so we could get supplies. I offered to people that they could have a 4x8 raised bed, and I would bring also the soil, manure, and whatever they wanted to grow for seeds. Some people already had a garden and they just needed to produce more food, and so I allowed those people to get things like soil and amendments. There was no financial test for this. It was just a Google form to register, which was really lovely to be able to just kind of take people at their word. And anytime you're able to do that in a community project, I really recommend that you do. It kind of, I guess it puts people at ease a little bit. And I was able to offer people support all summer. If they had any questions, like if they needed to know about pest management or anything like that, I could come by their house and give them a hand. And the idea was we really wanted to eliminate the barriers for people getting started. Like somebody can go onto YouTube and they can learn how to build a 4x8 raised bed. They may not have a vehicle that they can transport lumber in. They may not even have basic, you know, power tools. I don't know how anybody would manage to, you know, get screws into these boards with a screwdriver. It would take all afternoon. So we just thought, let's make it so that people don't have any reason not to garden, because 2020 was, quite frankly, a stressful enough year. So we had 9 households participate, and it was really great. We had one person that wasn't able to maintain the garden all summer, but the other 8 were able to keep going. At least 4 households out of the 9 expanded by adding tilled rows or greenhouses. I think one actually added another raised bed, and they paid for those things out of pocket. Some people hadn't gardened before. Some people had not gardened since they were children and when they were working with their parents and grandparents. And people just grew really well, and they were really enthusiastic. It was great to see. And this is Tori, and she grew a really simple garden for her family. So a very New Brunswick kind of offering of onions and potatoes, and some beans, things like that. And I did actually do a 4x8 raised bed in different dimensions. So you can see the bed in the background where I made it taller so that she could put things like that had a deeper root system in there. And then she took care of the tilling on her own, getting some help from a neighbor, I think. And this was Melissa and Annalee's place. So they had extended a garden. They already had some chickens. They're really getting interested in permaculture. And their new passion is seed saving, and they're starting to look at heirlooms and growing more varieties of tomatoes and things like that. So the total cost of this project, which was coordination, and it's a pretty good wage, definitely a fair wage for sure. And the supplies, the mileage, everything included, it was $3,700, which I think was pretty phenomenal to get people on a lifelong path of being a gardener. Then the second project we'll talk about is the Learn to Garden program. So that's still underway right now. I have about 9 people registered. And one of the things that I found is kind of neat is, like, I don't advertise a lot. I usually put out a poster and see what happens. People register very quickly. And then I tend to get just about as many people as I can manage. So I'm working part-time, and I'm the only person on the project, so I can't necessarily have 40 or 50 people in a program, but we have 9 people registered, and I think they all signed up on the first day. So for me, that's great. So I came up with some community surveys back in September. I wanted to kind of get a pulse on, kind of get some information from farmers and home gardeners, and also just consumers and their food purchasing habits. And one of the things that came out of that was a lot of people had mentioned this Learn to Garden kind of mentorship that they didn't have the ability or anybody to share their skills with. And there are a lot of seniors that had probably anywhere between 20 and 50 years of experience gardening. They don't necessarily have grandkids or kids around, and some of them needed help with labor as well. So I thought it would be really interesting to pair them up. And we won't limit mentors to just being seniors, but I think that our primary mentors will be probably folks in their 70s. So you just register as a mentor or a learner. There's no fee to participate, just a straight up simple Google form to fill out. I'll pair everybody up by the end of March. They can meet as often as they'd like, so they'll come up with an agreement. I'll run it between April and November because I want to give people the opportunity to learn how to put a garden away, put it to bed in the fall, and think about getting ready for the next spring. And then they can develop an exchange agreement. So it may be an hour of mentorship for an hour of labor. It may be 2 times a month, and maybe once a week. It really depends on what works for both needs. And I guess the other thing I'll say is I did find some interesting things when the survey data started coming back in for registration, and some of the people who were mentors also registered as learners because they had a very niche learning interest. Like they wanted to learn specifically about caring for fruit trees. So I thought that was really neat. There were some people that registered in the same community, maybe living a couple of kilometers away, and I knew they didn't know each other yet. So that's really nice that I can get people to also, like learners can visit each other's gardens, and we can make it more social so that we build community there. And the cost of this project, I'm projecting to be about $1,400. So we may end up taking a few more people on before the registration period ends. So let's say roughly 12 people for 8 months of mentor supported learning. So I think that's a really good value. And the third project I'll talk about is community orchard regeneration. So I'm kind of driving around through rural areas in New Brunswick, and I grew up in a rural area too in Kings County. And one of the things you will often see are old farmsteads where the house and the barn have long fallen in, but you'll notice that there's old apple trees around. You'll see rhubarb patches and peonies and flowers. Sometimes you'll find asparagus or horseradish, things like that growing. And I thought if this property is just growing up, it would be a really great community resource. But of course, it needs some care and maintenance. So there is a family who's purchased a very old orchard in our community just near Stanley. And they live on the property. The trees, I'm really not certain when they were planted, the oldest ones. I would take a guess at perhaps the 1890s. They may contain varieties that are no longer in production, which is really interesting. It definitely makes it worth it to preserve the genetics in these trees. And at some point, we may be able to send them to a lab in Ontario and do some analysis and figure out what kinds of apples are there. There are over 200 trees, and there's a mix of full-size trees, which are in this photo, and they're quite hard to work with. And then there are some more dwarf trees, which are kind of a more modern commercial variety. It had been open for community use. A lot of folks were coming in there and getting deer apples for hunting season, but most of the apples are getting eaten by the bears. So there are quite literally tons of free apples just there for the taking every year. So this is the farm site. And the owner, Tace, and his wife, Bess, invited us out to do a cider pressing. And they do work, both of them, and so they don't have time to do all the care for the trees. And so we're hoping that we can come in through the winter and help with some pruning. Even if we only get 5 or 6 trees done every year, that would be really great. And this was a really fun Nashua community growers event. We even took a big basket of garlic, and I'm not sure how many pounds, probably 10 or 12 pounds. And a group of us ladies stood around the table and just broke it all up. You know, it's a bit of a, it's kind of a chore actually. It's hard on the hands. And so we were able to just chat and enjoy this nice October day and get all of that stuff done in about 25 minutes. So it was just really fun for people to think about how much you can accomplish when you work cooperatively. And everybody brought with them, some sterilized containers, and they took home probably between 2 and 4 liters of apple cider. And most of us will throw that in the freezer and then enjoy it later in the winter. Some more photos. We had a really great assembly line. so many people working that we started to run out of jobs for everyone. So I guess I've already mentioned most of this. It's really about barter. So we're doing some work. We can come by, like friends of mine took apples in the fall and they left apple wine. So we can do some value added product and give that to the owners. What else? Tools are really the big expense. If you want to get things like pole saws and loppers and pruners, I was able to get a couple of pruning saws really cheaply, and so we'll use those this year. The only thing that I didn't include in this that you might want to consider is liability insurance. So for the homeowner or the orchard owner, to think about what they feel comfortable with. Obviously having people in a tree on orchard ladders and using saws and sharp tools maybe is a bit of a concern. So you'll have to sort that out as you see fit for your own community. And so $500 at the absolute high end, and year after year that gives us all the apples we can pick and a really awesome natural heritage resources preserved. So I wanted to talk a little bit about asset-based community development, which is a concept that I learned about in university, and I loved it, and it's really stuck with me ever since. These ladies are all a really integral part of our gardening group. So Cynthia on the left with the celery is, she's her and her husband co-own Trout Lily Farm, which is a micro farm. And then in the other photo, Ruth, Dorothy, and Marcy are helping me put in a community garden at the food bank in Stanley. And I would say between those four women, there's at least 100 years of combined gardening knowledge. So that's pretty amazing. So asset community development, which you'll often see shorthanded as ABCD, looks at community as a collection of resources or assets rather than a list of problems. So what we often see, unfortunately, sometimes we go to big community meetings and we're excited and there's a lot of energy in the beginning, but then we keep talking about problems and we keep looking at statistics and we get in like problem solving mode, and it can feel a little bit depressing and disheartening. But this is much more of an empowerment approach. So a lot of the assets in community are hidden or they're just simply unacknowledged. So since the early 90s, sociologists John Kritzman and John McKnight had developed this concept. It's been used widely all over the United States. I think perhaps Illinois was one of their original test sites for the concept. It's now used globally, and there's lots of free resources online. So one of the ways that you can do this is you can do asset mapping. So you can look at individuals, and you have this really simple worksheet, this head, heart, hands. And somebody might say, for example, around the head and knowledge, I know about most of the common diseases on apple trees in New Brunswick. And their heart asset may be that they're very patient, they're great with kids, they love to teach gardening. And with their hands, maybe they have the unique skill of knowing how to spin yarn from raw wool or dye yarn, things like that. And one thing that I think we need to really consider is that sometimes people that have been marginalized have a really hard time accepting that they are assets to the community and that they have really valuable skills. People that have lived in poverty or been racialized have been kind of, taught the opposite, really. They've lived in a disempowering system. And if people can't, if people are struggling to find those inner resources on their own, I guess the approach that I would take is to just try to get to know people personally And over time, you'll start to see what they're really good at, and maybe you can just make a nice comment or suggestion about areas that they can put their skills to use. So physical assets are another thing that you can map out. And I was just trying to think about, like, in these rural communities, what might already be around. So you can, obviously, you can make community gardens. You can farm cooperatively, all of those kind of obvious things. But there's some other food security aspects, like finding a fiddlehead patch, or there's asparagus around, or in my community we have a disused gravel pit, and there's enough raspberries in there for probably at least 10 families, plus maybe 2 or 3 bears to eat every year. And if we don't eat them, you know, they end up on the ground rotten, and that's not it's not the end of the world, but certainly we can make better use of that. And maybe somebody has, like, for example, a piece of land that they're going to lend out or lease out for a couple of years to get a new farmer started. Or perhaps you've got somebody, often, you know, older folks in the community, people that are retired are really happy to help out and might lend, like, their tractor services just for the cost of fuel, or you know, some minor payment. Then there's mapping the social assets. So those are more like taking the head, heart, hands gifts and really knowing who has what, and then how do they connect together. So for instance, in your community, you might have somebody that recently retired but worked for government for 40 years. And they may have, like, a real keen knack for putting together grant applications. So maybe that's your go-to person on your community garden group to help you bring in funding. Or perhaps there's somebody that has lived in your community for their whole life, and if you were to go out and try to do surveys and participatory research, it might take you, let's say, almost a whole year to find all of the farmers in a given community. But if you talk to that lifelong resident, they may be able to give you a list of, you know, dozens of farms, and probably give you personal introductions so that you could have talked to all these people in just a couple of months. And those are the assets that we just we find really easy to overlook, because we're used to seeing infrastructure and grant money as our daily bread, if you will. So that's everything for me about programs and community development approach. You can give me an email anytime. It's Amy P. Floyd. Make sure you get that P in there, at gmail.com. And the next couple of slides you can look through on your own, but I've got Google Forms and a Google Doc to give you everything that you need from the beginning to the end of the Learn to Garden project. If you are doing work similar to this in your community, I'd really love to know about it. The Raven Project doesn't hold any kind of you know, proprietary sense about these projects. It's more just so that we can know what the impact is and how programs might spread across the province. It's really just an interest in participatory research. I don't think you will be able to add data to these forms, but if you can, please don't, because it will affect my the data on my end. So either you can use the questions to rebuild the forms, Google Form surveys, or you can email me directly, and I'll see if it's possible to make a copy of the form and then make you an editor if you're short on time. Anyway, I'm not sure exactly how that'll work, but we can work through it. Definitely feel free to change the questions to suit your own situation. And if anyone replicates these surveys en français, I think it would be really nice if you would share it back with me or with other people, other communities and groups, so that we don't need to spend time duplicating resources. So everything is here, registration forms. There's a participation agreement, which includes some kind of safety information, like contact information for medical emergencies and things like that. And then post surveys. So I really want to have a good understanding of what might need to be changed in successive years. So thank you very much. It's been really a pleasure to be able to offer this information. And I really do hope to speak with all of you at some point, whether it's in a community meeting or email or whatever. I'm very open, so just reach out anytime. Thank you.
Amy, thank you so much for your time and willingness to share your knowledge with New Brunswickers in all corners of the province. Some of the resources mentioned will be linked to Food for All NB's resource directory and gardening landing page. Please see the description below for links to other resources. Join the Food Gardening in NB Facebook page. Check out our food gardening video playlist for more Made in NB content, and subscribe to the Food for All NB YouTube channel for more. We wish you luck with your home gardening adventures and see you next time.